Okay, good morning. Are we rolling?
Yes.
HGP believes strongly in freedom of speech, but the views expressed by myself, our reader, today's speaker, HGP members, and our guests at today's meetings are not the official views of the Humanists of Greater Portland. Our reader today is Leslie Haggard.
I'm sorry I don't have something inspiring for you today. I'm reading this prompted only by myself. And I'm reading it because I want to make sure my words are careful and phrasing is proper. Continuing research last Sunday, I stumbled onto the Club of Rome. To paraphrase, quote, "If you think we believe in zero growth, you don't understand the Club of Rome." I like to think I understand the Club of Rome, so I stand before you today to offer apologies and bring context to my rant at our last gathering. Though HGP members that I know are a hearty, forgiving, and generally thick-skinned lot, I yet feel compelled to extend my apologies to any of you who may have been offended, especially to Al, as well as Johnny, who himself expressed his love of capitalism. I'm not apologizing nor walking back from my comments, but how I managed to improperly and inadequately present myself. So I extend my apologies to any who may have been put off. Next, I apologize for being so reckless in labeling a person. Who granted me the right to label a person, especially someone as eminent as Dr. and Professor Richard D. Wolff? And those who know him. Richard, I hope Richard and those who know him accept my apology. I do know he accepts a Marxist economist moniker. Beyond that, he is known for his prodigious and prolific work on economic methodology and class analysis. Dr. Wolff has multiple degrees from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. He is currently Professor Emeritus at University of Massachusetts Amherst. For me, he is a friendly, approachable, understandable narrator and author who has enlightened me in many ways. He was born 1 month, nearly to the day. He was born 1 month, and nearly to the day as I, which offers a sense of comradeship. He was born a month before, and nearly to the day that I was born. And it gives me a feeling of comradeship. He's profoundly knowledgeable regarding world economies. He expounds on problems of capitalism, especially the private capitalism of the US. Economic Update is his podcast. He offers, quote, Wolf Bites, unquote, and, quote, Wolf Responds on Instagram. Now, for context, I ranted on about the problem of growth and how we can't just keep growing. We refers to the global north, but especially the world's prime consumer, the US. Can't keep growing context is as we are now. The crux is how economies grow, where they grow, how wealth and abundance is shared and distributed, and how capitalist scarcity is managed. From the global south, we northern exploiters, no pun intended, have since the 60s, according to Richard Wolff, extracted $152 trillion of wealth from the global south. Needless to say, the global south must be more fairly included in capitalist schemes for growth. Finally, my rant that technology will not save us was my belief. The context is that my belief is well supported by many scholars with better understanding of the subject than myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. I don't think an apology was necessary, but we accept. Now, a brief note about who we are. Humanism is an approach to life based on reason and our common humanity, recognizing that moral values are properly founded on human nature and experience alone. Humanism affirms the inherent dignity and worth of every human being. Since this is the only life of which we are certain, humanists believe that creative ability and personal responsibility are strongest when the mind is free from supernatural belief and operates in an atmosphere of freedom and democracy. And now I'd like to introduce our program, Whole Body Donation, the Whole Body Donation Program at OHSU. Whole body donors play a vital role in training future and practicing healthcare professionals while also supporting scientific discovery and innovation. Tamara Ostervoss, Director of the OHSU Body Donation Program, will describe the process, donor eligibility considerations, and the ethical standards that guide the respectful care and use of donated bodies. Please welcome Tamara Ostervoss.
Hi, thank you everyone for having me. I'm super excited to meet you and to talk about our program, and most importantly, to share a little bit about the incredible people who gift their bodies to our institution for their medical education and improve patient care at OHSU. So a little bit about myself, because I think it helps give context to the lens of the work that we do at OHSU, not because I enjoy talking about myself, but I have about 20 years of experience in death care. I am a licensed funeral director and embalmer. I worked in funeral service in Minnesota, both in rural and urban communities for quite a bit, and transitioned to whole body donation because of the experience that I had in my education. And I'll go a little bit more detail into that. As a young person, I knew I wanted to go into healthcare or something to do with the human body and being able to help people. When I was 15 years old, my brother-in-law died very unexpectedly in a car accident, and we were told due to that he sustained that we would not have a final viewing or goodbye with him. The funeral directors that we worked with were able to reconstruct him, and because of what that meant to our family and to myself, I wanted to go into that line of work to be able to also help people in their greatest time of need. As part of this education in funeral service at the University of Minnesota, where I first encountered whole body donors. Without these individuals, I never would have been able to learn the anatomy that was relevant as part of the embalming process. I never would have been able to learn the bone and kind of facial structures, the bony landmarks, the muscle insertions to be able to reconstruct people for their loved ones to have a final goodbye with them. And I think the most impressive thing is even, after this education that I had with them, I was still thinking about them when I was practicing those skills in funeral service. Every time I embalmed, I was picturing that anatomy, that donor that I learned from. Every time I had to reconstruct someone, I was also thinking of that individual. And the legacy and the scope of the donation that they provided far surpassed that initial education of me learning from them. And it touched so many people's lives who never even knew that they were benefiting from donation. And that kind of is what spurred me to transition from funeral service to whole body donation. And it's that lens that I bring to the work that I do. I'm a strong advocate for honoring whole body donors. It's incredibly important that they're treated with respect and in an ethical way, while also supporting learners. As a learner who's benefited from the gift of a whole body donor, it's not easy. This is a stranger that has gifted themselves to you. They feel an incredible amount of weight and pressure to do the best job that they can to really honor and kind of live in a way that makes that donor proud, even though they don't necessarily know them. And so being able to advocate and support learners while they're working with whole body donors is a really important aspect of my job. All right, so that being said, today's conversation, we're going to define what whole body donation is. There is kind of some misconceptions about what whole body donation is, how they may support education. So we're just going to define that. So we're kind of moving forward with the same lens while we're having this conversation. With that, I'm going to share some information about whole body donation in general, what's important information to know about whole body donation programs if you're interested in this for yourself or a loved one. As a society, we don't talk about death a lot. It's not something that we look forward to. It's not a happy conversation to have. And whole body donation is not a super popular choice. And so a lot of times people don't necessarily know what questions to ask. They don't know what information that they need to know to make an empowered decision. So hopefully today, I'll be able to provide that information to you for you to make an informed decision if this is, something you want to pursue or not. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about OHSU's body donation program specifically, go over our donation process, and then there will be a time for questions. All right, so what is whole body donation? Whole body donation is kind of simply defined by most people as the act of donating one's body after death to science. And that term science is incredibly broad, right? It can mean a lot of different things. So we're going to break that down a little bit. So when they use that term science, it traditionally means that whole body donors are going to support kind of these three key areas. The longest kind of term of support that whole body donors have been doing is anatomy education. And this is what most people think of when they think of whole body donation. They think of like a first-year medical student or another healthcare professional learner kind of in their early years of education that may be dissecting a whole body donor to have an understanding of the anatomy, kind of the different systems, how they may intersect or work with one another. It also could mean surgical simulation. And surgical simulation is exactly how it sounds. It's a simulated surgical environment. So you can think of like a fake operating room that may have a physician in their early years of training, or it could be an active practicing surgeon that has the same kind of patient beds, the same equipment, same towers, same lights, and the whole body donor is serving as the patient in that simulation so that trainer or that surgeon can gain surgical confidence and competencies, learn what they're supposed to be doing in kind of a safe environment, and then transfer those skills to a living patient in the hospital setting. Another area that whole body donors may support is research. And research can be a whole bunch of different things, right? It could be something very specific like Parkinson's or MS research, or it could be something, more broad where it may be like research and development for a new pacemaker. But those are kind of the three key areas that whole body donors support. One thing that's really important to know is that whole body donation is different than organ donation or donation for transplant. A lot of people go to the DMV to renew their license or their ID. They check that box to be an organ donor, which is a really great thing to do. But it is different than whole body donation. I'm not going to speak on donation for transplant today, but I do understand in the coming weeks, you will have someone from that program that will be talking to you, so they would be able to answer any questions about that. For today, just know that they're different, and I will only be speaking on whole body donation. All right, so you may be wondering why people choose donation. As I mentioned before, it's not a super popular choice. It's not for everyone, which I can respect and understand. But to give scope and context on maybe how not popular it is, only 1% of the deaths that occur in Oregon move forward with whole body donation for themselves. So that's a pretty small number of people who are choosing this for themselves or their loved ones. And some people wonder why. Why is this a decision that someone makes? And the big kind of three reasons that I hear from people, one is they want to pay it forward. They worked in the healthcare field. They received education from whole body donors. They've seen the value of it. They see how important it is, and they want to give back in that same way to be able to help support the education of future healthcare professionals. For other people, they may have had a medical condition that really impacted their life, or they may have benefited from medical care that impacted their life in a positive way too, and they want to donate so they can help advance medical research and help improve patient care. And something that I've been seeing over the last 5 years, and I think this one's kind of neat, is it's starting to become a family tradition. I've been speaking to people and they say, yeah, my grandfather donated, my parents donated, I'm getting up there in age, and this is something that I want to do for myself too. So that's kind of a new emerging reason why people may choose donation. So as I mentioned before, sometimes we don't have these conversations, so we don't necessarily know what we don't know. And so this kind of aspect that I'm going to be focusing on in this section is really what's going to help you determine if body donation is right for you and or if a specific program that you're looking at is the right program for you. So these are some kind of key important things to know. All of this information should be very transparent of the program that you may be interested in. I would encourage that it should be on all of their public facing information. It should be on their enrollment or consent forms. And all of this information you should be able to have with a member of a body donation program, and they should be able to have conversation with you about these topics. So the first thing that I would recommend knowing is whether it's an academic or non-academic program. So what that simply means is whether it's affiliated with a university or an institution, an academic health center, or is it a private company? Some programs can be very large when it comes to private. Some of them are actually corporations. Some of them it's the sole owner operator. So sometimes that may be an important deciding factor for people. When it comes to OHSU's body donation program, we are an academic body donation program. There are two in Oregon. Western Health Science University is the other one. And then non-academic programs, there's various amounts throughout the United States. The other important thing to know is acceptance criteria or eligibility criteria. So kind of like medical school, not everyone who wants to go to medical school is able to go to medical school. The same thing is true with whole body donation. Just because someone wants to be a whole body donor doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be eligible to be a whole body donor. Acceptance criteria is usually going to be focused on communicable disease risk. The other thing it's going to be focused on is kind of physical condition of the body at the time of death. It varies from program to program, so it's always important to know what the acceptance criteria is. The other thing with acceptance or eligibility criteria is it's usually going to be tied to what the program supports. That usually will inform what some of their acceptance criteria is. So as I mentioned before, whole body donors tend to support anatomy education, surgical simulation, or research. It's important to know what the program supports because sometimes people only want to support very specific things, right? If you have Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's or whatever it may be, sometimes it's really important that you want to support research just in that general area. So knowing the type of program and what they support can be key for some individuals. The other important thing to know is geographic location. Not every body donation program that offers services in the state of Oregon may be located in Oregon. So that means if you were to die here, you could be transferred across state lines. Some of them, they operate internationally, so you could be traveling overseas as well. For some people, they're like, I traveled my whole life. I get to travel in death. That's great. For other people, they were like, I'm born here. I died here. I want to stay here and support the community here. So knowing where the program is located, super important for various reasons. The other kind of deciding factor for some people has to do with final disposition. And when I use the term final disposition, I'm just referring to like what happens to the body when it's done supporting education. Do you have a choice? Some programs, they allow you to make that decision. If you want to be cremated, if you want to be returned for an earth burial, if you want to do, natural earth reduction or human composting, those are all things that could potentially be an option. Other programs, they don't provide options. They just say, this is what we do. If you want to be a donor to a program, like this is what we're going to move forward with. Tied to that is also timeline. Some programs, their timeline is pretty short. The donor will be with them for a couple of weeks, and then the remains, maybe move forward with final disposition. Other programs are really long. They can be anywhere from a year plus. And so knowing that time frame can also be a deciding factor for either you or your loved one. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit in specific about our body donation program at OHSU. So our body donation program has the mission to serve the healthcare needs of all Oregonians by supporting medical education of students, faculty, and practicing healthcare professionals and researchers. I know you're all very familiar with the state of Oregon, that map that's pictured there. Each one of those dots are a relationship that OHSU has in that community. So even though our whole body donors are up on the hill in Portland, teaching the medical students and surgeons and residents there, they take this knowledge, they take the skills, and they do go out into the community and share that knowledge on the patients that they're treating there. And to give scope to this, have conversations with your healthcare provider. Ask them about their experience with whole body donors, with anatomy education as part of their medical school training. A lot of them, even 20, 30 years later, they still show, gratitude and appreciation. They talk about how it's still relevant, how they still use that knowledge on the patients that they're treating today. And to give scope, we receive about 100 to 150 donors to our program. They teach about 5,000 learners every single year. If you think about that knowledge that those healthcare providers are performing in the community, sharing that with the patients, you think of that over a scope of 20, 30 years, that gift and the benefit that people are receiving, it's incredibly invaluable. Like there's no sort of value that you can put on that. Patient care is greatly impacted, and every single person who receives healthcare in the state of Oregon is benefiting from the gift of a whole body donor, whether or not they're aware of it. So with that said, a little bit kind of behind the why of why we do the work and how the whole body donors support us, we're going to go through what the donation process looks like to be really transparent on that. So this is kind of a roadmap of the conversation that we're going to be having. So the first kind of part of the donation process is going to be the consent form. All of our whole body donors must have a consent form on file. They either file it themselves before death, or their next of kin might file for it after death. But typically that's kind of how donation works, is all of our donors have to be informed, or their family has to be informed to how our program works. And those consent forms can be found on our website. They also can have physical copies sent upon request. The other key to this, if someone is interested in donation, is after they complete the consent form, we always recommend that it's returned back to us. One, that verifies that everything was completed correctly, and two, it removes a huge amount of stress from your family at the time of death, because they don't have to search, they don't have to look for that paperwork, they don't have to worry about sending it to us. And those are kind of the three ways that the forms can be returned: via email, fax, or it can be returned via mail. In conjunction with the consent process, we always recommend that people talk with their family, and I would advocate everyone should talk with their family about death decisions, not just when it comes to whole body donation. Share your decision with your next of kin. Provide them a copy of the consent form or the enrollment documents. On that information, it's going to tell them who to contact and kind of a step-by-step of what to do at the time of death. And then discuss final disposition options and a backup plan. So as I mentioned before, there is an eligibility or kind of an acceptance review. Not everyone, unfortunately, is eligible to be a donor at the time of death, and we'll get into those in a bit. But we do always recommend, regardless of whether it's our program or another body donation program, to have a backup plan in place. So your family should know what to do, what funeral home to call, and kind of final disposition options if they're not able to move forward with donation. All right. And another important thing about the consent form, it can be completed anytime over the age of 18, and it doesn't necessarily expire. So we have had donors to our program that have been enrolled, honestly, like 50 years is not extreme. Yeah. So it doesn't expire once it's completed. It's on file. If you were to ever change your mind, it can also be revoked at any time as well. It's not necessarily binding. All right. So the true kind of process may start when the death occurs. And a common question that I get, I kind of call it like the what if game. Like, what if I die at home and I'm not on hospice? What if I die on vacation? What if I die out of state? 99.9% of the time, this is what the process is going to look like, regardless of whether you're on vacation, regardless of whether or not the death occurred at home or a hospital. This is kind of what the process follows. So if you had the conversation with your family, you let them know what you want to happen to your body after death, this is typically what occurs. So the facility or wherever the death occurred, whether it may be a first responder, If the death occurs at home or a police officer, they're going to inform your next of kin. They're going to let them know that the death occurred and provide them some information surrounding kind of the circumstances of the death. At that point, the next of kin would inform the facility or the person reporting the death to them of their loved one's intent to donate and provide them our contact information. That's usually, like I said, 99.9% of the time how the process occurs. We recommend that the next of kin provides the contact information to the person at the place of death, just because we're going to ask questions that a loved one might not necessarily want to answer at the time of death. But if the next of kin wants to have conversations with us regarding that, they want to do the questions, we're certainly happy to speak with them too. All right, so once that individual gives our program a call, whether it's the facility or the person that is attending to the death at the time, that's where the eligibility or acceptance process begins. And as I mentioned before, it's not guaranteed acceptance at the time of death. We really determine based on the medical history and the circumstances surrounding the death. It is always recommended to have a backup plan in place. Potential donors are going to be screened for communicable disease and physical conditions that may impact dignified storage or long-term preservation. And I'll kind of get into more details of the eligibility criteria. So we don't necessarily have like a blanket policy because every death and every individual is unique. So we do screen every single person at the time of death. Some things that we do absolutely require, though, is individuals have to be over the age of 18. We do not accept minors into our program. That being said, there is not an upper age limit. People have lived well into their hundreds. They're still eligible to be a donor to our program. We do require individuals to be free of communicable diseases. Most often, we're going to be screening for hepatitis B and C, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, those sort of things. There is some wiggle room in that when you think of like COVID-19, right? When COVID first happened, when the pandemic first happened, obviously things were very restricted. Now, that isn't necessarily an issue. So the main kind of key ones that we've been screening for is the hepatitis B and C, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, et cetera. But just know what is kind of standard today may potentially change in the future, just depending upon disease progresses and medical advancements. Another criteria that we have is that surgical procedures must be healed. It doesn't matter what they were previous. If they're healed, you're eligible to be a donor. It would only be if they were unhealed. So yes, you can have multiple joint replacements. You could have like cardio bypass surgery. That wouldn't impact someone's ability to donate. We do require individuals to be free of trauma at the time of death. And a common question that I get is kind of what defines trauma? If I got into a car accident, would that make me ineligible to donate? And it kind of depends. What we use as kind of a marker is the significance of anatomical disruption. So the majority of our learners, they're at the beginning of their kind of educational journey. And so they need to have a really good understanding of foundational anatomy. And so if there is significant disruption, that could potentially make someone ineligible. If there was something like not as significant, it wouldn't necessarily impact their education and they may still be eligible. We do require donors to come into our care within 48 hours of death. Part of that has to do with the fact that we draw a blood sample and we send that for serology testing for hepatitis B and C and HIV/AIDS. And in order for those results to be validated, we must draw and send that in within 48 hours. And then lastly, we do require individuals to be within an average height and weight range. And I know this can be a point of contention for some people, but it's not a preference of our program. It really is to ensure that we're able to store people in a dignified manner. The equipment that we work with, it's a certain size. So if anyone is over the height of 6'5", we would not be able to store them without, frankly, harming them. That being said, if the clearance on the tray system as well is about 24 inches, that's pretty small. And so we have to have those physical kind of restrictions in place just to make sure that we can correctly store individuals in a very dignified way. All right, so that eligibility review conversation, it typically takes about 10 to 20 minutes with the healthcare provider. It's after that time we would be able to determine if someone is eligible or ineligible. If someone was ineligible, this is where the family moves forward with the backup plan. If they are eligible and they're able to be a donor, we would move forward with transport. So transportation occurs from the place of death to OHSU, as I mentioned, up on the hill. There's no cost for transportation if the death occurs in the state of Oregon or in the southwest kind of metro region of Washington. If the death occurs outside of that, there may be a variable transportation fee, and you can call our program and we can give you an estimate on what that fee would be. We do have a contracted vendor that is from Portland that goes to the place of death. So if the death occurs in kind of the far corners of the states where it may be, I think Baker City is a great example where it's like 5 hours away on a good day, right? If there's ice in Portland, if there's snow on the passes, it's going to take us a lot longer to get there. And so in those situations, we may work with the local funeral home to do that initial transfer and for them to store the decedent until our team is able to get there. There would be no cost associated with those sort of situations. So once the transportation occurs and they're received into our program's care, that's where our staff kind of moves forward with preparation and course deployment. So we have 3 licensed staff. They're also licensed funeral directors, embalmers, and crematory operators in the state of Oregon. And we are the ones who perform all oversight and care of the donors when they're on campus. We are the ones who do the blood draw and request medical records. And then once we receive negative serology reports and the medical records are reviewed to make sure that information in the initial phone screening is correct, then we match the donors with their course assignments. And a common question, thank you. A common question that we get is, how do you know what a donor is going to support? And I like to say that we don't necessarily decide ourselves. The donor and how they live their life and the medical conditions that they had ultimately decides what they're going to support. So a really great example of this is there are some occupations, like a librarian is constantly putting books up, or a truck driver, or a mailman, where they tend to have male person, where they tend to have like rotator cuff injuries. That's a really great example of like, okay, this group of individuals tend to have rotator cuff injuries. They would match really well with an orthopedic course where they're need to learn how to repair the rotator cuff, right? And so the donor kind of decides themselves as to what they're going to be supporting. Another common question that I get is, will we know what they supported? And what I always tell individuals is, if you ask us, we will tell. That's kind of our policy. If you don't ask us, we won't tell. And the reason for that is not everyone wants to know, right? And so we want to be really respectful of the individuals who don't necessarily, maybe they're supporting their loved one's decision to donate, but they don't want to know the details about it, which we totally get and we totally respect. But for the people who want to know, we're incredibly transparent and we will tell them exactly what the donor supported and how many learners benefited from that gift. And so once we match the donor to the course assignment, that is when our staff moves forward with preparation. And preparation depends on what the donor is going to support. So as I mentioned before, anatomy education, that is an area where the donor is going to have to undergo an embalming process. That's kind of similar to funeral home embalming, except funeral home embalming is focused on presentation, right? They want the individual to look as lifelike as possible for that final goodbye. We're more focused on preservation. We want that donor to support as many learners as possible for the entirety of their education. And to give scope of that, medical school is 4 years. The medical school learners, they have access to the whole body donors as part of their 2nd year of education in anatomy. So those donors need to teach for about 3 more years of those groups of learners. So yeah, so the embalming process is slightly different in that sort of scope, where we have to make sure the donor is able to teach for 3 years. Yeah. We do have other courses where embalming is not necessary, and that time frame may be a little bit shorter. On average, it's about 1 year on the low end of what a donor may support. So donors are deployed for the course. They teach the learners the course themselves. I'll show you the lab spaces, but our body donation program is housed within those spaces. So the donors have oversight by us the entire time they're at OHSU. So this is one of the lab spaces. This space is specifically for dry skills. And so I think it's an important context to know that, as I mentioned before, the learners don't necessarily immediately get access to whole body donors as part of their education. We want to make sure that they have a skill level where they're able to really truly benefit from it. And so this is where a lot of residents spend their time. You can see on the table, there's kind of like these black boxes. And these black boxes are kind of meant to simulate kind of a chest area. And this is where the residents would be practicing laparoscopic skills. So they have kind of like these scopes here that you can see. They kind of look like these wands. And they have little cameras in them, and the images are going to be displayed on that screen there. And we have little task trainers. So it may be as simple as like picking things up and putting them on one peg and moving them to another peg. Or they may be like learning how to suture knots and tie knots and suture. But this is kind of where that skill training happens. And then once they progress to a level in their education, they would actually move to have access to whole body donors to practice those skills on. And this is what the lab space looks like where the whole body donors are at OHSU. As you can see, as I mentioned before, it kind of looks like an operating room. Each one of those circles would be kind of like their own private OR sort of space. There's lights, there's monitors there. The only thing that we don't have is kind of like the equipment that could potentially be out. There are large towers that can come out. They have the laparoscopic scopes, those sort of things, but all that equipment is brought in depending upon what course they're supporting. But in general, this is what the space looks like that the donors will be in anywhere from a year to 3 years. All right, so once the donors are done supporting education, they kind of come back into the care of our program and we move forward with final disposition. So our program does provide a lot of different options when it comes to final disposition. We do this for multiple reasons. One, we want to be accommodating. We want to be able to support people in their decisions that they're making for themselves. Sometimes it may be a cultural reason, a religious reason. Sometimes it just may be a personal preference that they want to do. We do have a crematory on site, and we can perform cremation ourselves. As I mentioned, we are licensed crematory operators, and there's no costs associated with that. For other individuals who might want to do alternative things, we can return the whole body for cremation elsewhere. Sometimes this is done because some cultures or religions require it to be witnessed, and we don't necessarily have the facility to accommodate that on site at OHSU, but we can work with local funeral homes to be able to provide that option to families. Another option that people want to be returned for is alkaline hydrolysis. As I mentioned before, natural earth reduction or composting is another means of final disposition in Oregon, and so we can return a body for that as well. And for individuals who want to move forward with an earth burial, that's something that we can also accommodate too. Just know that with some of these choices, there may be costs associated with them, right? Funeral plots vary in costs, opening and closing varies in costs, and those would be sorts of things the family would have to be responsible for. All right, so that is kind of an overview of what that whole process looks like. As I mentioned, typically it's anywhere from a year to 3 years for this entire process to occur. The last thing I want to talk to you about is our donor memorial service. The donor memorial service is a really special event that occurs every December at OHSU. As I mentioned, for learners, learning from whole body donors can be really hard. It is really emotionally taxing for them as well. Some of them feel guilty that they're having this experience. Not all learners at all medical schools get access to whole body donors, so sometimes there's guilt associated with that. There's a lot of pressure to feel that they're doing right by these individuals who gifted themselves to them. For some of them, they have a lot of emotional pain about it because they don't know who these individuals are. And they spend a lot of time with them. They develop their own sort of relationship with them. And they feel a lot of emotional kind of tension about that. And so this is an opportunity where the students can kind of get some of that closure. They can have conversations with families, and it also provides the family a really important aspect as well. So a lot of people who choose whole body donation don't always have a traditional funeral service. And one benefit of a funeral service is you get public recognition of your grief, right? Your community, they know what you're going through. They know how hard it can be to lose someone. And so to be able to have that public recognition can be really important for people's grief process. Another thing that can be difficult for families when it comes to whole body donation is there's that waiting. They're waiting anywhere from 1 to 3 years to either receive their loved one back into their care and move forward with a different type of final disposition. And so that can be really hard because not a lot of people may understand what that's like. And so this provides them an opportunity to be with other families of whole body donors who know exactly what that waiting can feel like. And it provides them an opportunity to speak directly to the learners about the impact donation has had on them, with the learners also being able to talk directly to the families about how impactful this has been on their education and the appreciation and gratitude that they've had for the experience. So some key takeaways. Body donation is a generous gift that advances healthcare education and research. A lot of these skills you can't learn any other way unless you were to learn them on a living patient at the time that the surgery is occurring. And we don't necessarily want that, right? We want improved health care for everyone. And so it's an incredibly impactful way that we're able to learn from whole body donors. Donation decisions should be discussed with family members. It's not for everyone, and that's okay. We want people to feel fully informed and empowered in the decision that they're making. That being said, not all programs operate the same way. So it's really important if you're looking at this for yourself or a loved one to remember and understand those key areas of what type of program it is, what support it does, where it's located, what your final disposition options are. And when it comes to OHSU, we are committed to honoring donors with dignity, respect, and gratitude.
Let's start with Kurt Mackey on Zoom. If I were to die far away from Oregon, say in Europe or the East Coast of the United States, would my body be eligible or ineligible for donation?
It depends. So we have had donors who have died in other areas of the United States that have been eligible to donate to our program. Usually what it comes down to is there's a specific process that occurs with the embalming that the funeral home must be willing to do. And then the family also has to be responsible for the cost of transportation from that state to Oregon. And so if the funeral home is willing to make those accommodations in the embalming process and the family is willing to pay for the transportation, then assuming everything else matches with communicable disease risk, et cetera, yes, there is a potential there.
All righty, question number 1 here.
Two questions quick. I noticed you don't take donors under the age of 18, and it would seem to me that surgery and things like that, anatomy, needs to be understood by people under age 18. What's the reason why those people? So that's one question. And the other is, does it help your agency if there's a list of body parts missing and surgeries and history of medical conditions, so you know automatically the body has been modified through the years?
Great question. So this one regarding individuals under the age of 18, we truly believe in informed consent. So regardless of whether or not their parent could provide informed consent, we want someone to be able to make that decision for themselves. And so that's one of the reasons why we have we don't allow anyone under the age of 18. Your second question has to do with medical history. Yes. So if people want to provide kind of their own written version of their medical history, or sometimes they want to just write a note to the learners that are going to be working with them, we always encourage that. We'll add it to your file. If the death occurs, we provide that information to the learners. Yeah. So yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, question 2.
Do you offer alkaline hydrolysis as routinely? Or would someone have to pay for that?
Good question. When it comes to alkaline hydrolysis, I think there's only 2 in the state of Oregon that perform it, and we work with them to have the body coordinated into their care for that to occur. We will reimburse the cost of what essentially costs us to do the cremation on site towards that. The remainder the family's responsible for.
Does that alter the application form?
Yes, so on the application, it has a final disposition section, and you would have to essentially check, I want my body returned to XYZ place that would perform alkaline hydrolysis. You're welcome.
Okay, question 3.
I understand the body donation program at medical schools, but you mentioned that there are these private companies. So can you explain how that works and what, I don't understand how private companies are involved in body donation and what they do.
Yeah, so there are private or non-academic body donation programs. I can't necessarily speak on their operations because I'm not necessarily, a spokesperson for them. But they do operate throughout the United States. And if you have, or if you're interested in them, you can contact them and they would be able to provide you more information about the scope of them.
I'm not interested in them. I mean, what they do with the body, like you must know that, right? Like I understand medical schools.
Yeah.
Do these people then just sell them to medical schools elsewhere? Or what are they doing with the bodies?
So they're going to be supporting either anatomy education, research, or surgical simulation. Yeah. But yeah, it just, every program kind of they may support all of them. Like, for example, we support all 3 areas of those kind of missions. I know there's other academic body donation programs where they only do anatomy education. So it kind of just depends on the program and what they support. Yeah.
Okay, another question from Zoom. Pogan asks, what is your opinion of MedCure?
I can't necessarily speak on behalf of another entity. I kind of give those key areas for people to ask questions about to make that decision for themselves. Everybody is different. Everybody, may want to support different things than other individuals. I'm personally registered to the University of Minnesota. I want to go back home when I die, so that's what my plan is.
Okay, let's go to question number 4.
Yes, you mentioned the screening criteria, but then 2 steps later is the blood draw to determine whether you have infectious diseases. So I'm not quite sure how that works. They'd have to be transported back to you before you knew whether they were actually eligible.
Yeah, great question. We have the conversation with the healthcare provider at the time of death regarding the communicable disease risk. Sometimes people don't know, right? You've never been maybe tested for hepatitis B or C, HIV/AIDS, so it might not necessarily be in your medical record. And so that's why we do the blood draw. And in the instance, if someone were to come back positive, we do report those results to the Oregon Health Authority to follow through on their kind of communicable disease screening and risk process.
Okay, back to Zoom. Hank Robb says the presenter spoke about the donor rather than the body of the donor, as if the person who died were somehow still present. Was that intentional or unintentional?
I would say that kind of is intentional. We at OHSU see the body of the donor as a patient. We refer to it as the first patient, actually. And so a lot of the same protections that living patients have at OHSU, they're applied to the body of the individual. And so we see them as the donor. We see them as the first patient. And that's the expectation that we have with the learners when they're in our space, is that they are to treat them as they are, someone's loved one. They're more than just a body.
Thank you. Number 5.
If I was interested in donating my body to OHSU, but I wasn't interested in having my body be used by the funeral industry or in connection with any of the programs that OHSU have that go beyond scientific medicine. For example, naturopaths are now working with OHSU, et cetera. And I didn't want to have them to have anything to do with me either. Could I fill out forms such that I could be assured that those things would not happen, would not be educating funeral directors or naturopaths?
Good question. We don't necessarily have options when it comes to what a donor can specifically support. And part of that has to do with that matching process. I can say we currently don't support any education of funeral service providers from OHSU's whole body donors.
But it might be not.
At this time, we also don't support that, but I don't know in the future. I can't necessarily speak on that. Yep.
Most of us with our views wouldn't care, would we? Okay, back to Zoom. How does one obtain a list of programs that accept whole body donations? And is there a rating system or are reviews accessible?
It's a good question. I do know that there is a list. I think it's a university from Florida. They created a list of all academic body donation programs in the United States with their contact information. And that's something I'm happy to email to Dave or someone if he wants to share with the group. But I don't know anything about a rating system or reviews. I think part of that can be maybe subjective as well.
Okay, question number 6.
I have to pick one. You talked about 3 years.
Mhm.
What's happening for those 3 years? I'm just finding that fascinating. No. 3 years for the body has to be with the student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So part of that has to do with, their med school education is 4 years typically. So sometimes it could be, the anatomy course itself is 13 months where they're going through the different kind of organ systems. But then they come back and revisit those kind of in more greater detail. Sometimes they may be working with other learners as well, kind of doing like interprofessional experience where it is like a member of the care team together working with the whole body donor to learn how to communicate and kind of have those cross collaborations as well. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome.
Questions?
Excuse me. This is the first time I have heard of any kind of service delayed, but 3 to 4 years later. And it intrigues me. I understand it's non-religious, that kind of thing, but I think it's a lovely idea. But what percentage of the families would you say come back for that?
Great question. So typically, I think I invite around 100 to 125 families. We usually have 300 people or so in attendance. How many families that is, I don't necessarily know. We also provide the option for it to be live streamed. So there are a very large number of people who do choose to live stream it as well and watch the service. Yeah.
Okay, I think I've got a typo. Let's see. Question from Hogan again. If I'm signed up with, it says Medcare, but I think they might have meant Medcare.
Mm-hmm.
Can I sign up with OHSU instead?
You can, and some people do sign up to multiple programs. So for example, some people are snowbirds, they leave Oregon for the winter. So they may be signed up in 2 different locations. Yeah, you can certainly sign up to more than one program, or you can cancel your consent form at any program across the United States, not just OHSU as well. You should be able to call and revoke if you want to at any time, including ours. If you were to sign up and 3 years from now, you're like, yeah, this isn't for me. You can just give the program a call or write them a letter, and then they should be able to pull your form for you.
Okay, question 8.
So I had 2 questions. One is, you usually have plenty of people, or is it a dearth and you are struggling for people? And the second question is, when you are talking about trauma and you're talking about that as being one of the things that make a person ineligible,
I don't really understand kind of like cause of death, trauma related, how you interpret that and apply it.
Yeah, great question. So first question was, are there enough donors? No. To be, there are never enough donors. There's tons of research requests and medical requests that we're unable to support. We work really closely with our clinical faculty to kind of optimize the gift of the whole body donors. So as I mentioned, we receive about 100 to 150 and it teaches 5,000 learners. Sometimes we're able to do that because we'll have, let's say the orthopedic residents together and the neurosurgeon surgery residents together, both learning like spinal skills or those sort of things. So that's one of the ways that we're able to collaborate to kind of extend that gift to other groups as well and to meet as many needs as we have. The other question you had was related to trauma. So it kind of depends. We have those conversations at the time of death. But you can think of it like some minor things, right? Let's say you were to get into a car accident and maybe you just had internal bleeding, right? Not a lot of significant trauma. Anatomical systems aren't quite as disrupted as if maybe it was like a helicopter crash, for example, right? So that's kind of the scale that we use is, would an individual still be able to learn from it if they didn't have a baseline anatomical knowledge?
My question I didn't know if trauma was related to physicality or if it was related to emotionality as well.
Gotcha. Great question. No, we don't necessarily factor in the emotional context of it, right? And part of that has to do with the fact that they're going to be healthcare providers. They're going to be seeing a lot of different things, right? And this is an opportunity for them to learn. It's a safe place to, okay, maybe this is emotionally hard on me to take in, but we can pause, we can have a conversation. And so when they are on the clinical side, they are prepared and ready to have those sort of kind of go into action in the clinical side. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, the questions keep pouring in. Number 9.
Okay, one very quick question, and that is, my cousin wanted to donate his body and found out that because he had hepatitis B at some point in his life, even though it was cured, that they still wouldn't take the body. Is that normally the case? The longer question is, all these companies like at OMSI, we see Body Works or something where they're showing bodies. I'm guessing that's one of the commercial enterprises that you mentioned. I'm not sure. Is there any attempt by commercial ventures to go to you for bodies that you don't need and get them transported?
Good question. Yes, when it comes to some communicable diseases, they may be able to be treated in life, but when you get closer to death, sometimes your immune system isn't necessarily as strong as it once was. And so sometimes those can come back. And so if there isn't a recent blood test that we're able to use closer to the time of death, sometimes we do have to decline in those sort of situations. When it comes to Body Works, for example, or Body Worlds, those groups, the consent process does share that the donors are going to be used in that sort of way. So the people that are signing up for those programs are very well aware that they're going to be kind of stored or presented to the public in that sort of manner. Have groups come to us for us to support their requests that they might not necessarily have donors for? Yes. Do we support that? No. Our need at OHSU and to support the education within the state of Oregon is certainly greater than supporting those sort of ventures, and it's not in alignment with our ethics either.
Okay, number 10.
How many pediatrician surgeons? I have a dear friend who's very courageous doctor, did a surgery on this woman's newborn and saved his life, and he's healthy 3-year-old now. How did she learn to do this when there was no children can be donated?
Yeah,
bodies?
good question. So there are a lot of different simulators that we can get that are smaller sized. And then usually they'll work with comparative medicine. So for example, like, I know this isn't for everyone when it comes to like animal use, but like ferrets can have very small lungs. And so sometimes they'll use some of those animals to practice those surgeries as well to apply the skills to patient care.
Okay, number 11.
How many learners does a body participate with over a 3-year period?
That's a really good question. So it kind of depends. The medical school itself is around 150 learners. Some of those donors do go on to support other courses. Like the PA program, that's around 75 learners. The dental school is about 100. Radiation therapy program is a little bit smaller. So when they're supporting the medical education side, when it comes to anatomy, it's usually maybe about 400 or so at OHSU. If they're supporting surgical residency, that can depend. Because usually those donors will support about 6 to 8 courses. So it can be above that number of learners that are benefiting from it. If someone has a particular question about their specific loved one, we can give them those exact number of learners that benefited. Yep.
Question 12.
These percentage questions, but how often would you say you have to refuse a body that the donor felt was perfectly acceptable?
Good question. So when it comes to people who completed the consent form and they enrolled into our program, about 25% of those donations are declined. And the main reason for decline at the time of death has to do with an active infection at the time of death that may be antibiotic resistant, such as like MRSA or VRE or C. diff. As I mentioned before, we do work with physicians, so they may be in our lab space and then they may be going directly back to the hospital. So we don't necessarily want to potentially transfer anything to patient care at OHSU. So that's one of the reasons for that in place. The other key reason why someone may be declined when they're pre-registered has to do with the physical condition at the time of death that may make it hard for us to store them in a dignified manner or make it hard for someone to learn from them.
Okay, question 13.
Can family members change? Well, I have 2 questions. I'm sorry. Can family members change the status of the donation after you've died? And secondly, when the students are working on you and they discover something like a brain tumor or metastatic cancer or something that you maybe didn't know you had that might explain some behavior, do they tell families about that?
Good. So questions. First one, can family choose to decline the donation at the time of death? Yes, I assume that there are some families that never call our program and let us know. But then there also have been sometimes where, like, if there is family discord, right, where there are maybe siblings that don't necessarily all agree on donation, like we legally have to decline if there isn't one that has agency over the others, just because we need to have agreement and that sort of aspect of it. That's why we really emphasize that the conversation about someone's intent to donate happens before the time of death, so they know. Sorry, what was your second question? Can you remind me? Yeah, so they find something. It depends. So a lot of the learners, they're in the early years of education, so they can't necessarily give like a diagnosis. There have been some things that we have found. There's quite a few news articles about this one actually out there where we had a donor who donated to our program where she had situs inversus. So her organ system was kind of like flipped as to what it should be. And so that was something where they had a conversation with the family, and the family has been very vocal. They've been a part of the news stories and things like that as well. So in some situations, yes, that does occur.
Okay, 13.
I have what's hopefully a quick question. I have an implanted pacemaker, so it's buried in my heart somewhere at this point. Would that be? I know it has to be removed before cremation, but I don't know at what stage they remove them. I may have more. I'm hoping I live long enough to be a second. Does that make you ineligible for whole body donation?
Great question. That would make you ineligible for whole body donation. Yes, it does need to be removed before cremation, assuming cremation is something that you would want to do. Typically, pacemakers and medical devices are removed if the donor supports anatomy education. They are removed as part of that dissection process, which is a really great learning opportunity for the students to actually understand how like tissue kind of heals around it and that sort of stuff too. Otherwise, if it's not removed as part of that, our staff removes it prior to cremation. Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, 14.
It's already answered.
Oh, okay. 15.
Sorry, I was 15. I thought you said, I didn't hear it properly.
Oh, was somebody else 13 or did I mix up the numbers again?
You said 13 twice.
Oh, no kidding. I've done that before. Well, then I'll go back to Hank on Zoom. Understand that another use for human body remains is to put them in various environments to learn the processes of deterioration in those environments. For example, laying on the ground or being buried in it. How is that related to whole body donations as you've been describing them?
Great question. Yes, there are some programs that do that as part of their forensic training. I think it's the University of Tennessee has one. I think Texas has one, and then Colorado has the only high altitude one. They're affiliated with forensic programs at their academic institutions. It's another use of whole body donation. I would say it is part of the research component of it, right? They're trying to find out what animal activity occurs post-death. Like it's more tied to research. Yeah.
Okay. So now where were we? 16.
Yes,
Do I hear 17?
I'm an occupational therapist, so allied health.
Yeah.
And nursing, allied PT, OT.
Mhm.
I know they do anatomy and physiology, human anatomy and physiology. Where are the allied health folks getting the education, seeing the cadavers, their education?
Great question. So we do more than just the medical school. So we do support the radiation therapy program, the dental school, et cetera. We do support physical therapy programs as well. So George Fox has a physical therapy program. Pacific Oregon State University in Bend also has a DPT program, and we do support their programs too. Yep. Not because we don't want to, we just haven't been asked. Yeah.
Great nursing. OHSU is a great nursing education.
We do have a great nursing education, absolutely. I don't know if an anatomy with a lab component is required. I don't necessarily, but yeah. Yep.
Okay, are there any other questions? Did I miss a number? There, okay.
For one to state on their application, on their body not to be used for profit?
It kind of depends. Every consent form is different for every program. I think the biggest thing, if that is something that is important to you, is having those conversations with the programs that you may be interested in to see if that's something that they support, whether it's commercialization of products and or it's direct profit to that private entity.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can never figure out how to use the chat, so I just put my hand up. I'm a graduate from long ago, a graduate of what at the time was the University of Oregon School of Nursing. And it's nice to hear the compliments about my alma mater. We did have a term of A&P, and we did do cadaver studies, and I can't imagine that that's changed. So you were saying you seemed unsure, but I can't imagine that they don't still, as I say, this was 60 years ago.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you for that information. I know since at least I've been at OHSU 2016, we don't support the nursing anatomy education. And as far as I know, they don't have a lab-based component. I'm not sure how they may be learning it, but it's not necessarily through OHSU's whole body donation program.
Interesting. I think we used cadavers that we shared with a medical student, and it was just for one term, and it wasn't every day. So that's interesting.
We have never had ever this many.
Yeah.
It's award-winning question.
I think we're the right demographic. Thank you, Tamara.